Now, in our last video, we talked about projectile simulation in Total War Warhammer 40K, and rightly so because it's one of the biggest technical leaps that we've seen in the series. But as you know, we're going to be segmenting talking points about the livestream we've recently watched, and today I think there could be something else that might be even more impressive, and it's not about the bullets themselves, it's the soldiers firing them. Creative Assembly spent a surprising amount of time explaining what individual infantry are doing, and by the end of the showcase livestream, it was obvious that they haven't just upgraded the graphics or just added more animations, they've actually fundamentally changed how soldiers operate during a battle. Instead of an infantry squad behaving like a single unit that always performs the same action at the same time, individual models are constantly evaluating the battlefield, deciding what they should shoot, and even whether they have a clear shot and how they should react as the situation changes around them. It sounds like a small detail on paper, but it completely changes the way that firefights can play out. Now, the first hint of this comes from the redesigned unit system. The developers explained that Warhammer 40K squads are far more complicated than traditional Total War units because soldiers inside the same squad aren't all carrying identical weapons. For example, with a Kasserkin squad, some soldiers are equipped with hotshot lasguns, while others carry plasma weapons, meaning that the squad isn't just locked into a single battlefield role. Instead of simplifying everything into one attack profile, Creative Assembly decided to simulate those differences, and now individual soldiers know what equipment they are carrying and are using, and they'll select the most appropriate weapon for the target they are engaging. Plasma weapons naturally will focus on tougher enemies, while the rest of the squad continues contributing with conventional fire, creating a level of flexibility that simply wouldn't exist if every model behaved identically. The developers have also introduced a new battlefield classification system built around light, medium, and heavy targets, allowing units to understand what they are actually fighting, rather than forcing players to memorize countless armor values and hidden statistics. The game communicates these roles much more clearly, and the soldiers themselves use that information when deciding how to engage the enemy. It means the intelligence isn't only happening at the player level, individual models are actively making sensible decisions based on the battlefield that they are looking at. Now, this of course immediately makes squads feel less like animated stat blocks and much more like groups of trained soldiers working together. The really fascinating part though comes once the shooting actually begins, because that's where the simulation becomes much more detailed than most people probably realized during the livestream. Every individual soldier follows their own firing sequence rather than synchronizing perfectly with everyone else in the squad. They acquire a target, raise their weapon, aim, fire, recover from recoil, continue shooting until their magazine is empty, and then reload, with every one of those stages happening independently. And so if you wondered why the firefights shown in the gameplay reveal looked so much more natural than previous Total War games, this is a huge part of the answer. What impressed me more though was the way that those firing cycles respond to your commands. Normally, in strategy games, once a unit starts an attack animation, it's effectively committed to it until the animation finishes. Here though, the developers explain that every stage of the firing process can actually be interrupted. For example, if a guardsman has fired 3 rounds from his magazine and you suddenly order the squad to retreat, he immediately stops firing, moves to the new position, and later continues from exactly the same point in the magazine rather than magically resetting everything. It's an incredible amount of information for the game to keep track of because every soldier is effectively remembering the current state of their own weapon throughout the battle. It's not something that most players will necessarily consciously notice, but it's exactly the sort of detail that makes units feel responsive instead of robotic. The showcase then moved on to what I think is probably the smartest system in the entire game, and it's to do with the line of sight. During the battle, you'll notice that not every guardsman is firing at once, and the developers explain that the soldiers won't simply shoot through their own squad mates anymore. Every model actually checks whether it has a clear line of sight before pulling the trigger, and if another unit is standing directly in front of them, they'll wait until they have a safe angle rather than firing through friendly troops. That single decision suddenly makes formation width, positioning and firing lanes dramatically more important, because the number of soldiers who can actually engage depends on how you've deployed the unit. Spread the formation out across a wider front, and more rifles come into play. Pack everyone into a narrow position, and only the front ranks can actually contribute. The clever part is also that these decisions keep changing throughout the battle. The developers gave an example where the front rank of a squad is hit by a grenade, and instead of the soldiers behind remaining idle because they weren't originally firing, they immediately recognize that their line of sight has opened up and step into the fight themselves. It's a tiny detail that probably only lasts a moment, but it's another example of individual soldiers constantly reassessing what's happening around them instead of blindly following one instruction for the entire battle. Now, the target selection has also become far more intelligent, because if part of a squad can't see the enemy you've ordered them to attack, they don't necessarily just stand around doing nothing. With the fire at will stance enabled, they'll actively search for another valid target that they can engage. That means one section of the squad might continue firing into the enemy that's directly ahead, while another section engages troops approaching from the flank, allowing the squad to make much better use of its available firepower without requiring constant player input. It's exactly the kind of behavior you'd expect from trained soldiers, and it's another system working quietly in the background that people might not even realize is happening. To support all of that though, Creative Assembly has also introduced clearer feedback for the player. One of the frustrations in many of the older strategy games is issuing an attack order only to watch a unit stand still without any obvious explanation. Here though, the interface actively tells you when the light of sight is blocked, helping explain why soldiers aren't firing instead of leaving players to guess whether the game is actually bugged. The developers even admitted this is one of the mechanics they are most interested in refining during the closed beta, because it's impossible to predict every terrain situation until thousands of players start experimenting with the system. Now, another feature that really builds on this philosophy is Sentry Mode. Rather than constantly babysitting elite infantry, you can assign them a priority target and they'll hold their fire until that specific enemy comes into range. So imagine positioning a Kasserkin inside a fortified ruin and telling them to ignore the first wave of Orc boys because you are saving their plasma weapons for an approaching Death Dread. They'll remain in position, maintain discipline, and engage exactly the target you've chosen without wasting valuable firepower on less important threats or moving out of position. It's a deceptively simple feature, but it removes a huge amount of repetitive micromanagement while still giving players a much greater tactical control over how their best units behave. When you put all of these mechanics together, it becomes much easier to understand why firefights during the showcase looked pretty different from previous Total War games. The soldiers aren't necessarily smarter because they have one revolutionary AI system doing everything. They are smarter because dozens of small decisions are happening simultaneously. They are choosing the right weapon, checking whether they have a clear shot, selecting sensible targets, remembering the state of their magazines, reacting to changes in the battlefield, and coordinating naturally with the rest of their squad. None of those systems would completely transform the game on its own, but together they create infantry that behave far more like actual soldiers than animated units following a simple attack order. I think that these are some of the most exciting parts of everything that Creative Assembly has shown so far, because it's the sort of improvement that you can continue to notice hundreds of hours into a campaign, and if these systems perform as well as they promise to, then Total War Warhammer 40K won't just have some of the most technically impressive firefights in the series, it could also end up having the smartest infantry AI we've ever seen in a Total War game. Having said all of this, the smartest AI in the game potentially might make the game more of a simulation than a strategy game, at least in terms of micromanagement. That is potentially a cause of concern for some players, so let me know in the comment section below what you think of the smarter AI decision making, and whether actually this takes out some of the flavour of the game. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a thumbs up if you did, take care, and see you next time.